England, a land contested for centuries. For the last few hundred years, Viking expeditions from Scandinavia have raided and laid waste to the land. But in 1042, Danish control of England would end, returning to the Saxons. Less than 30 years later, in the year 1066, three men would battle to decide who would reign supreme over a land that would shape the medieval era. Now, prepare to witness the battles of Stamford Bridge and Hastings as three men fight for control of England. See the vast numbers of soldiers, their formations, and the context and history of the engagements. Now on Decisive Eras. Following the death of Canute the Great and his successors, England would once again fall under Saxon rule, led by Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor would rule over Anglo-Saxon England for 24 years. But as his reign was coming to its end, there were mounting concerns on who would succeed him. Edward the Confessor would die on January 5th, becoming the last king of the House of Wessex. King Edward had no true heir. In his final moments, it is claimed, he bequeathed the throne to his brother-in-law, Harold Godwinson. Only hours later, the High Council declared Harold Godwinson the new King of England, now officially known as Harold II. This new king did not sit well with everyone, however, and two other men in particular thought they had better claims to the throne. The first was the King of Norway and the last true Viking leader, Harald Hardrada. He was convinced to invade England by the exiled brother of King Harold II, Tostig, who wanted his earldom back after it was taken from him. The second man was the Duke of Normandy, William, who had been reportedly promised the throne by Edward the Confessor years ago. He had amassed a large force and had become one of the most powerful men in France. Now he would set his sights upon what he perceived as his rightful dominion in England. While the Norwegian Vikings and Normans prepared their respective invasions, Tostig returned to England, raiding its southern coastlines until Harold II began moving his troops south, forcing his brother-in-law back to Norway. Soon after, while William was preparing his ships, Tostig rejoined Harald, and they began their campaign to invade England. The duo approached from the north, raiding and pillaging villages as they went down the countryside. They set up a base at the riverside town of Ricol, and managed to win a victory when they were attacked by two earls, Edwin and Morcar, by baiting and encircling the Anglo-Saxons. While the Vikings were resting on their laurels from previous battle, Harold II managed to march his army 187 miles across England in just a few days, catching the invaders completely unaware. A trade of provisions and hostages was to take place between the Norwegian Vikings and rulers of the nearby city of York at the nearby Stamford Bridge. Not expecting a fight, Harald allowed his warriors to walk to the meeting point without their chainmail armor. The unprepared invaders were spread out on both sides of the bridge when they saw Harold II approaching with his Anglo-Saxon army, which not only had more armor, but outnumbered them. The Anglo-Saxon army consisted of over 10,000 troops, at least 2,000 of which were cavalry. Opposingly, the Norwegian army consisted of around 6,000 men split on both sides of the river. A further 3,000 Viking troops were left to guard their fleet at Ricol, and were unable to participate in the battle. Harold II would meet with both Tostig and Harald Hardrada on Stamford Bridge, promising his brother his earldom and a third of England if he came back to his side. Tostig refused to betray his Viking ally, claiming it was dishonorable, and rode back with Harald. The battle was on. The Anglo-Saxons immediately pushed towards the bridge, and Harald would attempt to lead his men on the wrong side of the bridge to rejoin the main force. As the Viking warriors successfully fell back to the other side of the bridge, a small vanguard had remained behind, holding up the Saxons much longer than expected. It is said that one Viking warrior would cover the last of his allies' retreat, killing 40 men before being killed himself. Now both sides of the battle were on one side of the bridge, and Tostig would advise Harald to retreat to a more favorable location. Harald would refuse, and instead formed up his army atop a small hill while dispatching riders to summon his remaining 3,000 men and recall. A Saxon cavalry detachment would charge the Viking flank, inflicting casualties before being driven back. Harald would then charge his army down the hill into the Anglo-Saxon army in a disorderly manner. The battle was brutal, but the larger Anglo-Saxon force was able to encircle the Viking army with cavalry, crashing into their rear and destroying any semblance of a battle line that remained. Harald Hardrada, though reportedly fighting valiantly, was killed after an arrow pierced his throat, with the feeble remnants of his army, including Tostig, being destroyed in short order. It was then that the fully armored reinforcements from Recall would arrive and charge the Anglo-Saxon army who turned to meet them. The Viking force, severely outnumbered, would be crushed. Harold II then marched down to Recall and let whatever small parts of the invading force that were left escape back to Norway. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was a great victory for the Anglo-Saxons. Harold couldn't enjoy the victory for long, though, as Duke William of Normandy had been hard at work building a fleet to carry his assembled army across the English Channel. On September 28th, just a couple days after Harold II's victory, William landed in England. Initially laying low and relying on reconnaissance, William eventually demanded that a nearby town by the name of Hastings surrender. They did, and word was sent to King Harold about the new invasion force. Not seeing William as much of a threat, Harold swiftly marched south to London to join his forces there. Meanwhile, William torched the English countryside and sent out propaganda that the king had personally decapitated his brother Tostig at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in order to sully his reputation. These tactics forced King Harold to leave London with a smaller army than he could have gathered if he had waited a few more days. Harold's army was tired from the fast march and rested, and William would take advantage by moving his troops closer. Both sides were now aware of each other's presence, and would move onto opposing hills in a standoff. The Anglo-Saxon army consisted of around 8,000 men, of which 1,000 were elite Huskarls. Against them, William's Norman army consisted of around 7,500 men, 2,000 of which were Norman knights. The Anglo-Saxons presided on top of a hill and formed into a shield wall, while the Normans remained on the low ground. Duke William would make the first move, ordering his archers to advance and fire upon the Saxons. The Battle of Hastings had begun. The Normans first tried assaulting the Anglo-Saxons with heavy arrow fire, but the Saxons were able to easily defend themselves with their shields. Next, a wave of invaders attacked the line, now engaging in hand-to-hand combat. This line, too, began to weaken, so William sent up his mounted knights to assist. Horses already burdened with hundreds of pounds of armament had a tough time ascending the slope the Anglo-Saxons occupied, so yet again, this attack did little to hurt the enemy, at least initially. The Normans' left began to break under the pressure, finally giving way to the Saxon right. William's left flank was now retreating down the hill and was pursued by the Saxons against the orders of Harold. His right flank was now completely exposed, and was decimated by the Norman forces which broke through his line. More catastrophes occurred as the entire Anglo-Saxon line advanced, and both of Harold's brothers that were present and leading the battle were killed. Bad news was spreading among the Norman line as well, as rumors of William's death circulated. In order to quell these rumors, the Duke took off his helmet and rode in front of the entire line, showing them that he was, in fact, alive. After initial setbacks, the battle had been, at least somewhat, turned around in favor of the invading Normans. Both armies now took a rest as they prepared for the next stage of battle. Once again, William attacked first, but with a new trick up his sleeve. Learning from the previous events of the battle, he repeatedly feigned retreat in his flank so that the Anglo-Saxons would run after them. When this happened, the invaders would turn around, regroup, and fight the disorganized Saxons. This tactic was used several times to great effect, as Harold's right side was getting increasingly diminished, with many of his military leaders dying in combat, causing even more disorganization. William saw his opportunity and seized it. First, he ordered more arrow fire, which worked to great effect as the remaining Saxons weren't as well trained as those who had died during the battle. Next, the Duke charged up the hill with his cavalry and punched a hole straight through the center of the Anglo-Saxon line. As chaos ensued, Harold would be struck in the eye by an arrow before being butchered by the charging Norman knights. King Harold II was now dead. What remained of his army was shattered as Norman cavalry wrapped around the Anglo-Saxon flank, killing any in their path. The Battle of Hastings had been won by the Duke of Normandy, now called William the Conqueror. William initially did not advance to claim the English throne, as he hoped for an official surrender and to further quell the Saxon resistance. However, he eventually accepted the English throne and was crowned in 1066 on Christmas, bringing Anglo-Saxon rule in England to a close. The battles of Stamford Bridge and Hastings are incredibly important in European history due to what they represent. The Battle of Stamford Bridge and the defeat of Harold Hudra signaled the end of the Dark Ages, while the Battle of Hastings and victory of William heralded the beginning of the medieval age. These events left the Normans as the rulers of England for the next 300 years, not only affecting their country, but the rest of Europe. The Norman era had now begun.